Welcome back, enthusiasts. With the release of the new patch for Path of Exile 2, there have been many builds floating around with a new meta becoming apparent in Chaos Damage Lich builds. Most of these builds are focused around all of the dot damage that can be applied, namely through Essence Drain. But today I bring you a build with a completely different twist and playstyle, the Chaos Totem Lich build. This build focuses around utilising the Dark Effigy Totem skill, and supporting it in any way we can to boost its damage output, whilst building up our own individual survivability and applying debuffs and curses to surrounding enemies, which all in all brings together a pretty well-rounded playstyle. This video will cover the build progression, broken down by acts, a mechanical overview of the build rotation, and my initial thoughts on the early endgame and where the build could go. Be sure to check out the build planner linked down below for full details, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out by leaving a comment. Let's get into it. At the start of a new league, you have to play with what is available to you at the time. Everyone will have a slightly different journey based on how they choose to play and their specific drops. For this build, you will want to create a witch where at the start you are given a withered wand unlocking the Chaos Bolt skill, the unearthed skill gem, and a scepter for your offhand unlocking the skeletal minion skill. These are your bread and butter leading up to the Clearfell encampment. I would recommend using Unearth as your primary damage skill here, as this does area of effect damage and spawns construct minions that will distract enemies and deal a reasonable amount of damage for you. During this initial leveling section, there is limited options available to work with, so I recommend picking up Contagion, Frostbomb and Flame Wall at level 3, and Essence Drain at level 6. If you are lucky enough to drop any support gems during this time, I would also highly recommend taking Last Gasp for your skeletal minions, Unleash for Contagion, and Arcane Tempo for Essence Drain. In terms of the passive tree, we keep it simple and go all in on damage early on, so we can focus on defense in our itemization. We head up the spell and minion damage trail towards Raw Destruction for a nice chunk of damage and intelligence, before heading up towards Entropy that further improves our chaos spells with an extra 18% chaos damage and 15% increased skill duration. By this point, the foundation is set for the journey to level 31. You will need to work your way through to Act 3, which is about the time that level 9 skill gems become available, unlocking our ability to summon the Dark Effigy Totem skill, the premise of this build. Progressing through Acts 1 and 2 will be largely based around the skills previously mentioned, with Essence Drain being the main caster skill. We look to get Chain on Essence Drain, as this makes it a lot easier to apply the dot damage debuff to multiple enemies, whilst we let Contagion do its thing to spread all the debuffs each time an infected enemy dies. A few other skills can be taken along the way to help smooth out this journey. Profane Ritual can be taken as another means of applying a chaos damage over time debuff by consuming corpses on the floor. Withering Presence will periodically apply a stack of wither to enemies within our presence. Convalescence, the replacement to the infamous Grim Feast skill, is essentially an energy shield panic button. And Bind Spectre, which allows you to bind an enemy type to use as a tank. In terms of itemization at this stage, it is recommended to focus on getting movement speed on your boots as soon as possible, a scepter for your main hand, a shield for your offhand, unless you're an experienced player or feel you don't need the survivability, in which case use a focus in your offhand, or alternatively you can use a wand in your main hand with a scepter in your offhand. Focus on resistances where possible, as this drastically reduces spike damage and will make the campaign more comfortable to run through. Other useful stats include maximum life, chaos resistance, cast speed, and rarity of items found, so be sure to keep an eye out for those as well. If you are lucky enough to come across any uniques during this stage, there are a handful that are particularly useful. The Lice Brig or the Wicked Quill Wands both work very well here. The Luminous Pace Boots are exceptionally good early on for energy shield sustain, providing a lot of survivability. The Ghost Rife body armor, although nerfed this patch, still provides extra energy shield and a bucket load of chaos resistance, which is hard to come by. The Devouring Diadem Helm also provides a nice amount of energy shield and chaos resistance, so this would also work nicely. The Threadlight Focus is pretty insane for damage early on, with a Scepter equipped, as it gives 10% spell damage per 10 spirit, which instantly gives us 100% spell damage and can be equipped as early as level 6, so if you drop this, it would be rude not to equip it. In terms of the passive tree, there are a few notables that we take here. We trail through practice signs for 6% cast speed, in order to get to pure energy for 10 intelligence and 30% increased energy shield. This then allows us to head north to take dampening shield, providing a further 28% maximum energy shield and some extra stun protection. We then go up from entropy and west towards the branch that contains essence infusion, trading along the side that improves our energy shield recharge start time. This will give us a nice balance of how long it will take our energy shield to start recharging, and how fast it recharges. Finally, we look to add some extra damage by trading into Spiral into Insanity, which combined gives us 57% chaos damage and 10% global defenses, greatly improving our chaos focus damage whilst boosting our energy shield at the same time. It is also possible at this point to get our first 2 ascension points via the Trial of Sekhemers, which becomes available to us during Act 2. If you are able to complete this, then I would recommend trailing into Necromantic Conduit, providing us 30% extra chaos damage on all of our damage we apply. A major damage boost with no downsides other than it costs us 5% of our maximum mana per second. This is not too difficult to overcome at this stage, and compared to most of our other options available in the Lich Ascendancy, this is probably the more comfortable choice. By the time you get to the end of Act 2, you will almost be level 31, the point at which we make the swap to start becoming more totem focused. You will have to be very lucky to drop a level 9 skill gem before the start of Act 3, but if you don't, you should drop one very early on in the first area of Act 3. This is the point where you will cut the Dark Effigy skill gem. Dark Effigy is typically seen and taken as a support skill only, but if you look closely, it has some pretty wild damage scaling potential due to the way it produces its projectiles, based upon the number of chaos damage over time debuffs active on each and every enemy within its attack radius, with no limit to how many enemies it can attack simultaneously. It's also important to note that Dark Effigy is a totem skill, and these are not classed as minion skills and scale off your own character's stats offensively, having only their own individual defensive stats. This means a spell-based totem skill such as Dark Effigy will scale the speed it attacks based on your own cast speed, for example. This is important because it gives us 2 ways to speed up how fast Dark Effigy can cast File of Fusion projectiles. Firstly via cast speed, which will specify its base cast per second, and secondly by how many debuffs that are active on the enemy it targets. This means if we have a cast per second of 1, and we have 1 debuff on an enemy, it will in fact cast 1 projectile per second. But if there are 2 debuffs on an enemy, it will instead cast 1 projectile every 0.5 seconds, and this scales with no caps other than the ability to apply different unique chaos damage over time debuffs. At this stage of the game, we will have 4 different chaos damage over time debuffs available to us, either at the start or during Act 3. Essence Drain, Contagion, Profane Ritual, and Decaying Hex, activated through casting the Cursed Despair. Typically, Profane Ritual will not get used too often at this point, as it requires a corpse to cast, so it is very situational. But the other 3 are pretty easy to apply, so this means we can get our totem cast speed up by 3 times before we have even taken cast speed into account. On top of this, we will also unlock the ability to summon 2 totems, through the use of the new support gems Overabundance and Ancestral Urgency, which at this stage will double our damage output and allows us to cast them extremely fast, so it doesn't matter if they get killed during a fight or not, since we can simply just summon them again on demand. On top of this, we also look to take the new skill gem Bind Spectre, which allows us to bind an enemy we have slain to the gem and summon it like any other summon in the game at the cost of spirit. The sole purpose of this at this stage is to distract enemies and tank enemy damage, whilst we can focus on outputting damage ourselves. A couple recommendations that worked well during the test playthrough are the Lost Men Brute in Act 2 Mastodon Badlands, which had slow movement but was very tanky, or the Vile Vulture in Act 2 at either Dishar or the Spire of Dishar, which had good movement speed and gap clearance but cost 120 spirit to summon. By the time you've killed the Bog Witch in Act 3 Cruel mode, you should have at least 200 spirit with a basic scepter equipped, so it should be possible to make this work. The main changes to items here are we look to swap to a scepter that has discipline on it rather than skeletal minions, because at this point these just aren't very useful anymore, and they recently changed discipline to apply to the player as well as allies within their presence. This provides extra energy shield to us as well as our Spectre and Dark Effigy totem. It's also worth noting that this counts as a persistent buff, so the support gem slots can be used for any spirit based supports that require a persistent buff active, freeing up potential slots elsewhere. The issue with taking the overabundant support gem on Dark Effigy is it reduces our totem durations by 50%, so we need to increase it to a point where it doesn't feel like we have to repeatedly summon it before it has a chance to do any real damage output. There are a few major changes to our passive tree to address this. The most important changes are to trail up to the northwest and back down along the perimeter to take both Spirit Bond and Ancestral Conduits. This increases the duration of our totems and how long they last, as well as improving both ours and our totems' cast speed after summoning a totem. We also spec into the Chronomancy notable, which along with the small passive nodes provide 40% increased skill duration, boosting both our totem duration and our chaos damage over time damage durations, simultaneously making it easier to keep our debuff supplied, as well as keeping our totems up dealing damage before needing to be summoned again. We further boost this by trailing towards the Lingering Horror notable branch, providing us with 38% chaos damage and a further 30% skill duration. We also look to take a number of other notables. Dependable Ward, we have already trailed close by, and this provides us with extra energy shield support. Overzealous makes our skills cost 15% more mana, but grants us a huge 16% extra cast speed, so if you're able to solve the mana regeneration here, it can greatly improve damage. Alternatively, you can opt to take Cast Cascade instead of Overzealous, which will ramp up the cast speed during combat, so might feel a bit more clunky, but won't put mana regeneration pressures on the build. It's also worth noting that quite early on in Act 3, you will encounter the Chaos Trials, which if you could complete a run and kill the first boss, will provide you with your second set of Ascension points, allowing us to either further boost our damage from our Unholy Aura via Blackened Heart, or if you have enough life pool to justify swapping where your base mana regeneration comes from, you could also take the Soulless Form Ascension node, which lets 10% of damage bypass your energy shield, but basically solves your mana regeneration issues so long as you have enough of a life pool. With all these in place, the build starts to feel a bit nicer to play, and sets a foundation for which we can build upon. By the time you hit Act 1 Cruel mode, the build should be starting to come together, so we look to make a handful of adjustments to help us get through Cruel mode a bit faster. Firstly, at this point, if you haven't swapped out the shield in your offhand, it is highly recommended to try and look for a wand or focus with any decent amount of damage on it, so we can either run a scepter and focus setup, or a wand and scepter setup. Either way, we will want the scepter here, as it provides us with the much needed spirit for this point in the game, but we look to boost our damage because enemy health pools drastically increase as we get deeper into the campaign. We add the Ingenuity support to Convalescence, reducing its cooldown by 30%, allowing us to reduce the downtime after being used, which in combination with increasing its duration, starts to narrow the situations where we are in combat and don't have it available. It's important to know that the Convalescence cooldown does not start until the skill has ended, so we cannot get into a situation of 100% uptime without reducing the cooldown to 0 seconds, which is certainly not possible at this stage. We also trail into the Arcane Blossom notable on the passive tree, which provides us with 45% mana regeneration. Any mana issues you may have been having due to the Necromantic Conduit Ascension node should be made a lot better due to this. It won't be long until you get to Act 2 Crawl Mode, which is where level 3 support gems start to drop. So there are a couple of additions we can make depending on how many of these you come by. Chaotic Freeze can be added to Contagion, as it's easy to apply, and along with Unleash, it will be applied to 3 enemies, and will spread to others if they are killed within range. This allows all our other Chaos hit damage to build up freeze on these targets, whilst affected by Contagion, building in some crowd control to the build, which becomes a bit of a godsend later into the game, because the sheer movement speed and size pack of enemies can become a bit overwhelming. If you have enough spare spirits, you can also look to socket Heightened Curse into Despair, which will boost the potency of the Chaos Resistance debuff applied to enemies, allowing us to deal more damage. And since this is a separate way of multiplying our final damage, it is stronger than it would initially seem. We can also look to path up north on the passive tree into Dark Entries Notable, which along with the small nodes provides us with 28% chaos damage and +1 to levels of all chaos skills, which is extremely powerful for this and every chaos damage build. I would expect by Act 3 Crawl Mode that you will have come by a number of level 3 support gems, and along with boosting our skill gem levels, we may be putting mana pressure on the build again. With this in mind, we make a few adjustments to the build to alleviate this. We socket in the Inspiration support gem to Despair, as it reduces its mana cost by 30%, and since this is the most costly skill to cast, it goes a long way to helping combat our mana issues if we have them. We also look to take a number of mana regeneration nodes up on the top part of the passive tree to drastically boost our mana regeneration, as well as increase our maximum mana pool by trading into raw mana and Ether Flow, providing us with 50% flat mana regeneration, 8% maximum mana at the cost of 10% increased mana cost of skills, and 50% mana regeneration whilst moving. The other major change we look to make in Act 3 Crawl Mode is to start baking in Blasphemy, which will convert any socketed curses into auras with increased size but reduced potency. This can be a very powerful tech if utilised in the right way, and we look to use it here at level 52 onwards so that we can equip Temporal Chains, a very powerful curse which reduces enemy movement speed and also increases the duration of negative effects on affected enemies, such as our Chaos Damage Over Time debuffs. This provides us with a challenge if we want to continue using Despair, as by default we can only apply one curse. So we look to take the Whispers of Doom key passive, because this allows us to apply one extra curse, but it doubles the activation time of the curses we manually cast. This is an acceptable trade-off, because with the state of the game as it currently is, enemy movement speed is one of the biggest challenges when you get deeper into the game. So any way to slow these down whilst not removing any damage output is very welcome. On top of this, we will be able to solve the activation time problem later on anyway. To use Blasphemy at this point, we will need to turn off our Spectre, because it's unlikely that you will have enough spirit to have both active at once, and Temporal Chains really is so good it's worth that trade-off. You will want to socket Temporal Chains into Blasphemy along with Magnified Effect, and if Spirit allows it, Heightened Curse. Right now, we look for any way we can to boost the size and strength of the aura, because we don't have enough passive points to boost these without the use of supports. Any spare spirit beyond this point can be used for any secondary buffs, such as Vitality, Mysticism and Cannibalism, but none of these are essential. For the build rotation, we play as follows. Place Despair under the enemies you are about to fight, to apply the Decaying Hex debuff. Cast Contagion so enemies are primed for spreading the debuffs on death. Place our Dark Effigy totems somewhere sensible, which they should start casting projectiles at affected enemies in range. Cast Essence Drain liberally to apply the extra debuff, as well as to apply Hinder to all enemies in range. If possible, cast Profane Ritual on a corpse to damage enemies above, and to apply a further debuff. If you find yourself in trouble, Convalescence can be used to start regenerating our energy shield constantly for the duration, and can get us out of a sticky situation. By this point, we are through the campaign and heading into the endgame mapping system, which begins with a fairly noticeable increase in monster difficulty due to the way their HP scales currently. I've been testing many things out, and I've made a lot of adjustments to the early endgame variant in the leveling planner, so I would look there for a better preview of what I'm working on. The main change to note is the move towards a singular, more powerful totem, with the use of the Greatwood support gem, in combination with the key passive Ancestral Bonds. This allows us to cap out the bonus from Greatwood at the cost of 100 spirit, so it puts an extra spirit requirement on the build, but it feels really good to play so far. I've also been speccing into more defensive passive nodes, such as Heavy Buffer and Patient Barrier, to build up some much needed survivability since mapping really penalises dying. I would not recommend going Glass Cannon on any build in this game in its current state. I'll be looking to provide further details on this variant of the build once I have comfortably got it running T15 and T16 maps, as well as having the Endgame planner available to use. Until then, I would recommend checking out the Endgame variant on the leveling planner in the description below, which is where I've been keeping notes of what I've been doing up until now. Any further questions, feel free to leave a comment down below, or you can join the Discord or jump in when I'm live on Twitch or YouTube, which are linked at the top of the planner. Until next time, enthusiasts, much love, keep safe.